Okay, here we go. So we are in Derech Hashem. We are in Chelik Daled, the fourth part of the Sefer. We are in Perek Daled, chapter 4. And we have made our way most of the way through the chapter. We are now on page 290 in the classic Feldheim edition. And we are up to paragraph Ches, the paragraph that starts with the number 8, paragraph Ches. That's again page 290. That's what we're up to right now. And as a quick recap, essentially what the Ramachal has focused on in the beginning of the chapter has really been the first pasuk, the first 2 lines perhaps of Shema. In that first line of Shema, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the Ramchal focused in on 2 aspects, 2 concepts, which are what he described to be extremely central for the purpose of humanity, and a condition that is added on top of that. So those 2 concepts were Yichud Hashem, the oneness of Hashem, which the Ramchal described to be much more than what we would call monotheism, much more than the idea that there is one God and not 2, but really the concept of Ein Od Milvado, that there's nothing that exists in the world that is outside of Hashem. And in that sense, Hashem is one. That is one concept of Yichud Hashem. The other concept of Yichud Hashem, of that first pasuk of Shema that the Ramchal described is the idea of Kabbalas Umach Shemayim, accepting the yoke of heaven. Those are the 2 components, accepting HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ultimate control and kingship over the world. Those are the 2 concepts. And then there was the condition that is added on top of those 2, which is the condition of Mesiras Nefesh, of being willing to be Moser Nefesh, to be able to give our own lives for the sake of these very central concepts, these concepts that are very central to Yiddishkeit as a whole, these very central beliefs. And the Ramchal explained that this really keeps the world running. These concepts, the Yichud Hashem, Kabbalas Umach Shemayim, they keep the world running. And the willingness of mankind to sacrifice ourselves for these concepts, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, essentially, imbues the world with a tremendous flow of positive energy and literally keeps the world running. And even if it's not necessarily on the full level of those who were literally Moser Nefesh, literally give their lives, but the thought and the Gemir's Das, the decision to be willing to do that, is a microcosm of that same nature of dedication to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it brings that same light, that same positive spiritual energy to the world. And then finally, the Ramchal shared that the idea of Baruch Shem Kvod Machusa Olam Voed, that line that we recite quietly after the first pasuk of Shema, that line he described as the line that the angels use to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because they come in direct contact with the full experience of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's yichud, of Hashem's oneness, and the Omach Shemayim, Hashem's kingdom. When we recite Shema and we accept it upon ourselves, we come in contact with it, but in a much smaller way, and therefore we too recite Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Olam Voed, but we do it quietly because we're not getting the full revelation, as it were. Yom Kippur, however, is that one day of the year where we are like the angels. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that we sprout wings and we fly up to the heavens. It means that our appreciation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our spirituality reaches a level close to that of the angels, which is why we recite Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Olam Voed out loud, just as the angels do. Okay, so that's a recap of the chapter, what we've covered so far. We are now up to page 290, paragraph Ches, paragraph 8. V'amnam shahar parshos hinehim hashlamas ha'inyan. The other parshios, the other three parshios of Shema that follow that first pasuk, they are the completion of the inyan. V'nichlal ha'inyan b'shloisha ikarim. And included in this are three primary components. V'heim, they are kabolos u'malchuso ve'ahavaso, accepting Hashem's yoke of Hashem's kingdom and a love of Hashem, adding that dimension. Kabolos ol mitzvos, number two is accepting the yoke of the mitzvos, the commandments. And then thirdly, zechiras yitzias Mitzrayim, recalling the exodus from Egypt. And the Ramchal will explain why that is indeed so central. HaParsha Rishona, the first of those three parshios that follow the first pasuk of Shema, Ba yiskavein ha'adam nischazek ve'avozu yisbarach b'chol tzana'eha. In that paragraph, a person focuses on strengthening his love for Hashem in all of its ways. Dahainu, that is, b'chol levavecha, with all of our heart, uv'chol nafshecha, all of your soul, v'chol me'idecha, with all of your means, with all of your measures. Another element of that first paragraph of Shema is the idea of the Jewish legacy, of the continuity of that light, that divine light, and the acceptance of Hashem's yoke to our children and to our offspring. That's why we find in this first paragraph of Shema the commandment of Vishinantam Levanecha, you should teach your sons. And to perfect in every sense the situation of man. When you're sitting in your home and when you're going on your way. There's a kind of a totality of the human experience at all points of life, both when we are settled at home and when we're going on the way, we're perfecting ourselves with all of these aspects. And perfect the house itself, not just ourselves, but the house itself is perfected in this way. And that's the we write it on the doorposts of our house. So that is the first pasuk of Shema. That's again, it's bringing in the element of the love of Hashem, passing it on to our future generations, taking it to all different parts of our lives, and attaching it to the house itself. Okay, Tess, we continue with paragraph number 9. The next step is to accept the yoke of the mitzvos, of the commandments, in the second paragraph of Shema, which is V'hayim Shema. And then in the third paragraph, we mention the exodus from Egypt in the Parsha of Tzitzis. V'hayinu, and this is, the exodus from Egypt was a big deal. It was not a mere step in the history of the Jewish people. One of the foreign lands in which we inhabited through our journeys. It was much, much more than that. The Ramchal is going to get into more depth, but his opening line is, it was a tikkun gadol, it was a tremendous fixing, correction that occurred when we were with the Egypt experience. The nishar davar lenetzach, and it remained forever, permanently. V'hainu, and that is, ki me'achar cheto shel adam harishon nishar hanoshis kulam mekukal. So the Ramchal, as he does in many, many places in the Sefer, turns back to what we learned in the very beginning of the Sefer, that there was a total shift that occurred in the nature of the world and the nature of mankind with that original sin of Adam Harishon. That man and the world as a whole became mekulkal, became corrupted to a certain degree. Evil was empowered, was strengthened throughout all of the creation. So much so that there was no room left for good to exist, to grab hold. Even though it's true that Avram Avinu, he long preceded Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Egypt experience, and he and his children were separate from the rest of the world, dedicated to Hashem. This is a really critical point that the Ramchal makes, which is something that we discuss a lot on Pesach, which is that there was a critical change from when we went down to Egypt, as is described in last week's Parsha by Yigash, and when we left Egypt. We went down to Egypt as a family, but we left Egypt as a nation. So even though Avram Avinu did achieve a certain closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and did separate himself from the rest of the world in that way, it wasn't a nation. There's no nationality yet. There's no nation of Hashem. And there was not yet a situation for us to merit those crowns that were befitting that nation, because of the evil that was darkening them. That zuma, that filth that entered the world, that first sin. That they did not escape it entirely. Therefore, we needed to be exiled, so to speak, to Egypt, and to have a servitude there. And during that shibud, during that slavery, we were refined like gold in a crucible. That idea of removing all of the impurities and refining the Jewish nation in Egypt, which Chazal referred to as the crucible. The Torah, we were purified. When the proper time came, Hashem strengthened his hashpa, his influence, his energies, the ha'araso, and his illumination, al Yisrael, the Jewish people, the kafetz hara lifneim, and he subjected the evil before the Jewish people, and he separated the Jewish people from them. And he elevated them over that lowliness that existed, and he shielded them from it. The result of this was that the Jewish people became redeemed from evil in an eternal redemption. And from that point forth, we were established as a complete nation, clinging to Hashem and crowned by him. So there was a cosmic shift, if you will, that occurred in Mitzrayim. Number one, we entered as a family and we exited as a nation. And number two, there was a purification process that we experienced. That excruciating slavery was not for naught. It was an act of refining, of purifying the Jewish people. And the Ramchal describes that really what was happening was the Jewish people were being separated from the rest of the world, and that the effects and the control of evil, which was introduced into the world by Adam HaRishon's original sin, was really the Jewish people being removed from that. And we were being given the power to tap into the powers of good and to escape those powers of evil. This was an eternal change and correction that occurred. Magios lanu kulam tuliyas bo. An amazing idea that all the good that comes to the Jewish people after that experience, it all depends on that change that occurred. So that's a really powerful line in their empowerment, their Hashem, for us to absorb. That really Yetzias Mitzrayim was made it all possible, meaning that that's what made all the good that the Jewish people became capable of possible. That is why we find such a unique emphasis on Yetzias Mitzrayim, on the Exodus from Egypt, where we are commanded to remember it constantly and to mention it in our mouths. Through this, through this, it strengthens that tikkun. It keeps that going, meaning it intensifies the light amongst us, and it gives consistency to that benefit that occurred then in Egypt. So the Ramchal is saying an amazing thing. He's saying, number one, Yetzias Mitzrayim was a huge cosmic change in the future and in the history of the Jewish people. A total shift, where we were separated from the rest of the nations of the world and removed from the influence and from the ill effects of that original sin. That's point number one. Point number two is that the reason why there's such an emphasis and such a constant mention of the Exodus of Egypt, that we're supposed to constantly remember it. And we mention it twice daily in Shema. And we mention it Kiddush and Shabbos. And we mention it at this and at that and the other thing. It's everywhere. It's not just because it's so central, so monumental in the creation of the Jewish people, but that energy and that change that occurred, that literally made us who we are, it continues to feed from those mitzvos. Those mitzvos that connect us to Yetzias Mitzrayim, they continue to feed us that energy, that flow of spiritual energy that we received at that time. And that's what enables us to accomplish tremendous good and to tap into tremendous divine light. So that's really a very powerful idea in explaining the third paragraph of Shema, which is all about Yetzias Mitzrayim, and why that is so central, even though it seems to be just one of the steps along our national history. Okay, paragraph 10, Yud. There is another tikkun that occurs that is incorporated in the reading of these three parshios. That's perfecting the man, in all his different facets, with the light of Hashem's oneness, also to correct and to perfect all different aspects of creation. The totality of a person is Ramach, is 248. This is the idea of Ramach Ivarim, that we have 248 limbs. So says the Ramchal, one of the mystical secrets of the world, that the world also has a formulation in which it can be broken down into 248 components. So the world as a whole is lines up with the spiritual composition of man. So the spiritual composition of mankind, is a microcosm of the world as a whole with these 248 components. Both of these levels or layers, if you will, of 248, they need to be perfected and developed through the oneness of Hashem. V'niskan al yidei ramach tevos shebekriya Shema. This is accomplished by the 248 words of Kriya Shema. So that is why we find that the number of words in Kriya Shema is very precise. It's because, says the Ramchal, the very deep mystical explanation of that is because it's supposed to line up with the number 248, which is the 248 components to man and the 248 components to the broader creation, because they are both being fed, being perfected through that spiritual energy that is feeding through Shema. That's what's happening. Because Shema is the manifestation of the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is what's feeding the spiritual energy to the entire world. This is why, by the way, there's this adjustment when someone recites Shema by themselves. They add the words Keil Melech Ne'emon, 3 words before they begin Shema Yisrael, etc. Whereas if someone is davening with a minyan, they don't add those 3 words. Why? Because when someone's with a minyan, the Shliach Tzibur has 3 extra words that he recites when he completes Shema, which then, signals to the Tzibur, to the congregation, to continue. Hashem Elokeichem Emes. The last 3 words are repeated by the Shliach Tzibur. So those, because we see here in Ramchal, which is also, you see this in Halacha and in Gemara, that the number of words of Shema is precise, but it's only here in the Derech Hashem where you'll get a full appreciation of why it's so critical, that exact number of 248. For that reason, that there's a precise number of words, and it's critical to have exactly that number. That's why we have this formula that when it's with a minyan, you have those 3 extra words, and without a minyan, we have to replace those 3 extra words with a different 3 extra words, Kil Melech Ne'emon, to remain consistent with exactly 248 words. Okay, let's continue with paragraph Yud Aleph, number 11. Chazal, our sages, they established the Brachos of Kriya Shema. So Kriya Shema, both at morning and at night, is preceded and followed by special Brachos. This is because every single day, the entire world is renewed before Hashem. This is in 2 senses. One is in its establishment and in its continuity. The divine flow, that shefa, that energy, is renewed. To keep everything in place, to keep everything running. Excuse me. Vashen is the second sense. Every single day of the 6,000 years of the existence of the world, they've all been decreed from before Hashem. In regards to certain lights and certain divine energies. Mitzius umatzavam, their existence and their situation. Exactly what's needed for the world. In order to complete that the desired environment and to come to completion. Every day is really its own day. No day is really just a repeat of the previous day. In this sense, the entire world is being renewed. Hashem has planned out every single day of the 6,000 years of the existence of the world. Hashem has a specific intention with every single day. In that sense, every day is new. And that's why we say, as we approach the Shema, in the Brachos of Shema, Mechadesh b'tuvo b'kol yom ma'aseh bereshis. Hashem renews with his goodness every single day ma'aseh bereshis, the actions of creation. V'hinei, so continues the Ramchal, V'hinei, al ha'shorish hazeh tiknu ha'brachos ha'ila v'hashvachos. Based on this particular concept of Hashem renewing the world, that was what was focused on in the establishment of the Brachos and the praises that precede and follow Shema. All of creation, which is renewed every single day. The totality of creation can be divided into two. One is the world at large, the upper elements and the lower elements, and mankind. Those are the two components of the creation. V'hainu Yisroel. When we say mankind, we mean specifically Klal Yisrael. Shem mina adam be'emes. That's the true mankind. V'hinei al seder zeh, in this way, sidru bracha rishona b'shevach klal habrios u'fekidehem. So it's this division which is being expressed in the brachos. The first bracha is the shevach, is the praise of the world at large and all of its officers. Vehem habrios lamata v'hamalachim lamala, which means the creations below and the angels above. Kol echad b'sidarav, each one according to its order. V'kol b'zeh inyan ha'yom v'halayla, we make mention of day and night. V'ha'ma'oros, and the luminaries hamoshtem b'hem, that rule over the day and the night. Vashenis, the second bracha, b'shevach al inyonim shel Yisrael. There's a focus on Klal Yisrael in the second bracha. V'ava she'ahevam v'akerev she'kerevim avodaso, and this unique love that God has for the Jewish nation and how He drew us close to serving Him. V'nichlu b'brachos ha'ela kol ela inyonim b'darcheim ha'amitim. And all of these concepts are incorporated into those two brachos. And then we go into Kriya Shema. Then they added another bracha after Shema, focusing on the miracles that Hashem has performed. Specifically, the Exodus from Egypt and its details, arranged according to its secrets, Okay, so let's just quickly recap. And I just want to emphasize that if we approach our davening, the brachos of Shema and Shema itself with awareness of these concepts, it really brings it to life. So let's try to lock in the core points. The brachos, there are two brachos that precede the Shema, and the Ramchal explains that the focus of those brachos is the fact that the Shema feeds the spiritual energy of the entire world and allows it to be continued to be renewed, and that there's this constant renewal that exists. The world can be divided into two categories. That is the world at large and mankind. Mankind focusing on the Jewish people, which are the epitome of mankind. And the two brachos that precede Shema are in line with those two components. So the first bracha is focusing on the world at large, which is why we talk about the day and the night. We talk about the angels. We talk about creation as a whole and how it's being renewed. That's the focus of the first bracha. The focus of the second bracha is the continuity of mankind, specifically the Jewish people, which we express by focusing on the love that Hashem has for the Jewish people and how he drew us close to him to serve him. Those are the first two brachas that precede Shema. And then the one bracha that follows the Shema, the Ramchal explained, he didn't really explain why this is, but the focus of that bracha is on the nisim, on the miracles that Hashem has performed. Okay, let's move on to the last paragraph here and finish off the chapter with this last paragraph, number 12, Yud Beis. V'hinei ikar inyan zeb baboker, the primary time of this is in the morning. That's when the renewal of creation occurs, as we mentioned. At night, something has been added to all of creation, which is the concept of night. That's really the completion of the day and all of its aspects. And based around this concept is the reasoning behind the brachos of Shema of the night. But they're shorter. It's a repetition of what was mentioned in the morning, which is fascinating. So that's why you find that the brachos of Shema of the morning are much longer. The brachos of Ma'ariv of Shema at the nighttime are shorter. They're of a similar theme, but they are more condensed. Because it's really the completion of what happened in the morning. There's an added bracha at the nighttime, which is why there's 4 brachas of Shema at night, 2 before and 2 after, because there's an additional one for the new concept of the night, which is the concept of rest, of sleep. With all of its aspects. Birkas hashkivenu. This is the extra bracha of hashkivenu, which literally means to lie us down, focusing on rest and sleep. Okay, and that concludes Parak Dalet, chapter number 4, Yeshakayach. That is the completion of the Ramchal's explanation of Shema, starting with the first pasuk of Shema, Baruch Shem Kavod Machus Olam Va'ed, the 3 paragraphs of Shema, and the brachos that precede and follow Shema, both in the morning and at night. Shekayach, thank you everyone for joining. We're going to hold class here for tonight. Next week, we will continue Mitzvah Hashem with chapter number 5, which is where the Ramchal will explain tefillah, prayer, which will be focusing on the Shemona Esrei, Shachris, Mincha, and Mariv, and the kind of the deeper role that plays in the grand scheme of creation, as the Ramchal continues putting everything in its order and in its place. Okay, Shekayach.